everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on cultural competence for interpreters. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time from your very busy schedules and making it tonight, wherever you are in Australia. My name is Fatih Krakis, and I'm the Trainer and Training and PD Coordinator for all graduates interpreting and translating, as most of you would know by now. I hope you've all had a good break and are ready to take on 2021 with whatever it may throw at us. So today's session on cultural competence is going to be delivered by Marta Menendez. And now Marta has provided cultural competence education for government and non-government organizations for more than a few decades now, I guess. She is also an interpreter and translator, and she also teaches at Western Sydney University, delivering various interpreting and translating subjects there, both to local and international Spanish students. Now, before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping, as you all know by now. Now, the webinar is being recorded, as always, and those of you that have registered to the live session will be emailed a link with the video tomorrow. Now, this particular session will also be made available on our YouTube channel as well. So you can watch it there at any time and share it with any of your colleagues who may be interested too. Now, certificate of attendance, you will all be issued a certificate of attendance within a week if you have attended the live webinar. So not just registered, if you've attended the live webinar and if you have stayed on for the full duration of the broadcast. Okay. Apart from that, if you've just watched the recording, you can still claim PD points. You just have to check with Nati in regards to what's required. So please do follow up with Nati for what may be required. But if you joined the live session and you stayed on for the whole duration, you will be emailed a certificate within the week. Okay, so it is quite a busy webinar today. Thank you so much for all of you for registering. We have had over 500 registrations with about 300 of you here now. Now, our webinar is an interactive webinar, as always. Now, any comments you may have or questions that you may have, you can enter it into the question function of the GoToWebinar app. Now, as hopefully that you would understand, there is more than 300 of you here now. If I am unable to get to all your questions and comments, I do apologize. Now, I will direct your questions to Marta as you ask them, and I will read out your comments as you make them. But whatever I can't read out, we will hopefully answer after the webinar in an FAQ format. So we'll get those out to you within a week or so as well. Marta and myself will answer your questions in a written format, and we'll email them out to you if we are unable to get to all your questions. All right, now handouts as well. If you have a look at your GoToWebinar app, you're always going to be finding my present to you on there, which is the Aussie Code of Ethics. If you already haven't read it this week, there it is again for you. You know, it's there if you'd like to download it in a PDF format. And as usual, when we can, we also upload the presentation slides as well. You can also access the presentation slides downloaded from your app. Now, before I hand things over to Marta, I just want to start off with a poll question. Okay, so you're going to find a question on your screen. If you can all choose an answer. So the question is, as an interpreter, are you often asked to provide cultural advice? Okay, so you've got yes, no, and sometimes there. Yep, so we've got quite a big proportion saying sometimes, almost 70%, yep. 20% has said yes, and 12% has said no. Okay. So I think majority of us would have been approached for cultural advice. Those of you that haven't been, I'm pretty sure one day you will be approached. So thank you very much for your attendance with the poll as well. There we go. So we've got 66% has said sometimes, 70% has said 20, and 14% have said no. Okay, so a big majority of you have had been approached for cultural advice from service providers at some stage throughout your careers. All right, thank you very much. Now, I am going to hand it over to Marta. Unfortunately, Marta's computer has had some technical issues within regards to her webcam, and we are not able to connect to Marta's webcam tonight. But having said that, she is here in full voice. So please do excuse us for not being able to share Marta's camera with you. We are going to be able to listen to her beautiful voice, and of course you have the the presentation slides on your screen as well. Marta, thank you very much. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and welcome to all the participants. Okay, so you have been asked a number of times to provide cultural advice, maybe, or a suggestion, or some cultural information. And I think we need to make a difference about providing advice about a certain culture and providing some information about certain cultures. And we'll go back to that at the end of this presentation. Okay, so cultural competence. What is cultural competence? In the past, we were asked to be culturally aware. And that was something that came in a way of educating communities, educating the populations about differences. And so in the early stages of the multicultural policy, we were asked to be culturally aware. We used to talk about tolerance. We were asked to be tolerant with diversity, tolerant with new migrants, be tolerant in the process of people acculturating, assimilating. And that was what we were asked to do at the time. I'm not talking about in the probably 70s or 80s, even the 90s. But tolerating something or tolerating someone, that has a bit of negative connotations, because we tolerate things that we actually don't like a lot. We tolerate them. So these days we change the rhetoric. We are talking about accepting and respecting differences, respecting people from other cultures, respecting other cultures. We might not understand them. We might not even like the difference, but we need to respect them because it's important to them. And I worked in the legal sector, I worked in the health sector and the community sector. And I always draw the line on legal issues, the legalities of things. as long as we are respecting the law of this country, differences are accepted from my point of view. I leave that to you to think about it. If no one is committing a crime, if no one is offending anybody, what's the problem with differences? Think about that. Okay, so today we are going to apply the concept of cultural competence to the work context, outline the knowledge, skills, and attributes of a culturally competent professional, and communicate effectively with culturally diverse people. First of all, I'd like you to think about a time when you had to interact with someone from a different cultural background to yourself and things didn't go well. Think about that situation for a minute. What helped and what didn't help? What knowledge and skills were useful in this situation and which ones were not? What values and beliefs did you bring to the interaction? And did you learn anything from this interaction? When we talk about cultural competence, we always start from the self. Becoming a culturally competent person, worker, professional, it's a process. It's good that you're here today, but if you think that you're going to be suddenly culturally competent by doing this training, well, think again. This is one step in the process of becoming culturally competent. And there will be many steps in that process. Okay, so what is cultural competence? And we're going to go into each term. But cultural competence, as I said before, we were asked to be culturally aware. Cultural awareness was what we used to hear before. But now we add equity. Cultural competence, cultural awareness plus equity is cultural competence. But what does it mean? Equity means recognizing that not everyone shares the same level of resources to improve their life. And so it's important to respond to people with different needs in different ways, because equal service does not always result in equal outcomes. And you as interpreters know this very well, because if you have someone with a disability, for example, if they have hearing issues, hearing problems, what do? You speak louder. So you have to change your service, the way you provide service, so the outcome is the same. And there would be many other situations. It's not about equal service. It does. If some people say, but I do the same for everyone. Well, if you do the same for everyone, you're not meeting people's needs. Instead of equal services, we need to provide equitable services, so the outcome is the same for the patient, for the client. In other ways, we have to change the way we provide our service, so the outcome is the same. So culture, what is culture? It's much broader than ethnicity, nationality, and language, and it's made up of many elements, including history, religion, values, beliefs, and social organization. Now think about your culture. How do you get your culture? How do you acquire your culture? Who are the people in your life that helps you to develop that culture? Think about your parents, your grandparents, your teachers at school, society in general. What about media these days? Technology. Everything around us help us to develop our culture. And you as migrants, you would know that when you came to Australia, you changed your culture a little bit. And I normally use this example. When you have a plant sitting in one corner of one room and you move it to another section of the house, another room, because there is more, I don't know, wind or sun or heat or cold, the plant will change. It will develop differently. It will behave differently. And it's the same with people. When you change people from one culture, from one country to another country to another culture, that person will change. So culture is learned. And as I said, we learn from everything that is around us, people and everything else. And it's constantly changing, like language. They're not static elements in our life. They're constantly changing. And it's an integral part of everyone's life. So in this picture, we have the self. This is us in the most basic mode. Then we have this circle, and this is probably something that comes with us by birth. We have no choice, really, about our ethnicity, the way or where we come to life, whether we have a disability or not, our genetics, our gender, orientation, age. We have no control over that. Then the second one is some of our experiences in life, whether we have been victims of violence or abuse, discrimination, racism, our education, whether we were able to finish high school, for example, or not, the income that we are able to get, our housing, where we live, whether we live in the south or the northern suburbs or the western suburbs, our health, whether we have a refugee experience or migration experience, at what stage in the acculturation process are we? At what stage? And our relationships, relationship status. So all of that is helping to develop your own culture. And the last one is about the external parts of our lives, like our seniority at work, for example, if we are a manager or not, geographical location, our qualifications, our professional affiliations, what status we have in our work life. That also helps develop our culture. Now, what is competence? It's a broad concept, and it's a demonstrated ability to use knowledge, skills, and understanding to perform effectively and confidently. It could be that you need to be competent at operating a machine. or at injecting vaccines, or anything that is competence. So by saying that we need to become culturally competent, that means that we need to practice, because we don't learn to use a machine, to operate a machine in the first go normally. You need to practice. And it's the same with cultural competence. So cultural competence is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system. It's not just about the individual. It's about an agency, an organization, a community organization, a government organization, or among professionals, and enable that system, agency, or those professionals to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. Sometimes we talk about the culture of this organization, the culture of or the system, the system culture. We have a good example now with Collingwood, the AFL team, and the report that just came out, and it talks about issues in the system, not just the people, the whole system. This report found that there are very serious issues about racism in the system of his club. So it's not just about people. Of course, if the system has problems, the people that work in that system will have problems as well. So cultural competence is the ability to identify and challenge one's cultural assumptions, and we all have them. We all have these assumptions. We all have these biases, prejudice. We all think about that. The question is, do we act? And because we have this prejudice, we were going to offend someone, or because they have these biases, we are not going to talk to these people. That's a different thing. We all have those assumptions. What do we do with them? That's different. Okay, so the ability to identify and challenge one's cultural assumptions, one's values and beliefs, developing empathy and connected knowledge, the ability to see the world through another's eyes, or at the very least, to recognize that others might view the world through different cultural lenses. Cultural competence is much more than awareness of cultural differences, as it focuses on the capacity of the system to improve services by integrating culture into the delivery of services. It requires accountability, action, skills development, and reciprocity. Accountability. We are accountable to ourselves to become culturally competent. It's important because we deal with people from different backgrounds every single day. No matter what we do, we are interacting with people from other backgrounds different than ours. So we need to be accountable to ourselves to make sure that we become culturally competent. But we are also accountable to the service that engages our services. If we work for an agency, we are accountable to that agency. A government organization, same thing. We are accountable. We have policies. We have processes. It requires action. And in this, I give you the example that I always use, and it's very clear to me. I know that smoking is not good for me. But am I prepared to do something about it, to stop, to quit smoking? Being aware is not enough. I need to do something. It requires action to make sure that I become culturally competent. It requires skills development. And we learn every day from people. And that's where reciprocity comes in. We learn from them. They will learn from us. But we learn from our clients. We learn by researching. We learn by talking to a community organization that can give us, for example, some idea of what's happening with this community. How can I address these issues that I have? Some problem that I need to resolve about this community. How can you help me with the information that you have? Can I get some of that information so I can solve that problem? We talk about a continuum of change. As I said, it's a process, and I leave it to you to identify where you stand, where you sit in this continuum of change. So, are you in this cultural destructiveness, or are you sitting here in cultural incapacity, cultural blindness, cultural competence, or cultural proficiency? Let's see what that means. So cultural destructiveness is what used to happen in around the 60s in Australia. So it was forced assimilation. By policy, by legislation, new migrants were expected to assimilate. Suddenly, from one day to the next, become Aussie. So there was subjugation, and the rights and privileges for the dominant groups prevail. In this section, we have cultural incapacity, where racism occurs, stereotypes are maintained, and there were unfair hiring practices. So where a job description would include a criteria, for example, that people needed to be 1.80 centimeters to be able to apply for the role. So someone shorter than that could not apply for this position. So that's unfair hiring practices. Or that because of your gender, you could not apply for the job. Or because due to your disability, you could not apply for the job. Then we have cultural blindness. So people ignore differences and treat everyone the same. We discussed that treating everyone the same is not going to solve the problem. So it only meets the needs of the dominant groups. We move to cultural pre-competence. And I guess that many of us would be here, cultural pre-competence. So where we explore cultural issues, we are committed to change. We assess needs of organizations and individuals. One step further, we move to cultural competence. So we recognize individual and cultural differences. We seek advice from diverse groups, and we hire culturally unbiased staff. If you are in a position where you need to recruit people, I would suggest that it's important that you have a criteria or a question in your interview that assess people's cultural competence. And the last one is cultural proficiency, where people implement changes to improve services based upon cultural needs. So in this section, I would say that people look at statistics, check who is around in their community, and of course, interpreters, many of us work freelance. We are not in a position to do this. But if you are managing an organization, for example, an agency, a translation or interpreting agency, you would have to do this. Implement changes to improve services based upon cultural needs. Check statistics, check what groups are in our area, what is the demand. Maybe the biggest group doesn't need interpreters because they are established communities and they have been here for 60 years and they don't need anymore, although sometimes that could be a mistake. Okay, so developing cultural competence is a process of continuous improvement, not a one-off event. Why is it important? Because the population is changing all the time. Demographics are changing all the time. So every couple of years or so, we have new groups coming to Australia. I was just checking recently some of the languages that I never heard of before. Some languages in that list that I was checking, I never heard of those languages before. And I worked in the multicultural sector for more than 20 years. And still, I'm learning. Increasing workforce diversity, that changes all the time as well. And it's not just the people that we are serving, it's also the people that we work with. We need to be culturally competent for them too. Disparities in access to services. There will be groups that find very difficult to access services. Unequal education outcomes. We have people that, because of different reasons, war, for example, were not able to attend school for years and years and years. So if they couldn't go to school, they probably lack understanding of their own language, let alone English. And there could be different expectations from different groups and different people. Cultural influences on accessing services. We have policy responsibilities. Wherever you live, whatever is your area, I'm sure that there will be policies. I'm in New South Wales, so I just listed a few that we have in New South Wales. But I'm sure that you will have policies in your area as well. So if you work for an organization, you will have an interpreter policy, government organization, I mean. If this is not a government organization, maybe you could ask if it's needed. Maybe you can start writing a policy. And the bullying and harassment policy. We have legal obligations like National Multicultural Policy 2011. We have the New South Wales Principles of Multiculturalism Act and the Anti-Discrimination Act. And the cost of cultural incompetence are so great. There were cases in court where organizations have to pay huge amounts of money because they didn't use an interpreter for a legal matter, for a medical issue. Okay, let's move to cross-cultural communication skills. Mindful listening. I'm sure that many of you have already seen this, but I guess it's important to go back to it because sometimes we forget. Mindful listening, not just listening to the words. We need to look at the body language, gestures, what people are saying, what people are not saying, and why. I worked for many years in the areas of domestic violence and sexual assault, and I could tell sometimes what people were not telling me when they were presenting a statement to the police, for example. What are they not saying? And I understand that we are interpreters and we need to just relay what people are saying. But sometimes because they're ashamed or because of, I don't know, maybe community pressure, they won't tell the whole story. So just keep an eye on that, because it might be the case that you can provide some assistance in that area without overstepping your role. And it's a fine line. I understand that. It will be it is a fine line. Okay, so mindful reframing, and that means clarifying, repeating what the person has said just to make sure that you understood. Face management, you know that some people will say yes to everything when they don't understand, just to avoid embarrassment. Building trust with your clients, with your patients. Collaborative dialogue. And adapting communication styles.
Sorry there, Marta. I've just got a question coming in from Andrina. She's just saying, what do you mean we can assist in that area?
What do you mean?
Andrina, can you please just rephrase your question? Maybe by the time your question came through, what Marta said had already passed. So please, a bit more context.
Maybe she's talking about what I said. Maybe you can assist this person when they're not saying. As I said, it's a fine line. It's a fine line.
Andrina is saying when she spoke in regards to the statement with the police.
Yeah. Sometimes victims of domestic violence, for example, will, depending on what community they come from and how open they can be about talking about sexual assault, for example, or domestic violence. Those are very emotional situations. Trying to talk to a police officer, that's probably a man, about what, the experience of sexual assault or the experience of domestic violence. It's very difficult, not just because the situation is difficult, but because you're talking to a man about what they did to you. And I'm assuming that this person is a woman, the victim is a woman, because that's most generally the case. The victim will sometimes not say everything because they are embarrassed, because there is someone with her in a supporting role, and is that person, and the victim feels that it's some pressure from the support person, and they will not say everything. And I know, as I said, it's a fine line. I know that we are supposed to interpret what the person is saying. But remember that we have a debrief session. We could have a debrief session. We have briefing and debriefing. And if we don't have it, we can ask for it. When we debrief, we might talk to that police officer and say, look, I think that, I don't know, there are some other issues that the person is not talking about. You can, if you are really listening, mindful listening, you might pick up on some signs. You might pick up on what this person is not saying, and you think that it might help the victim in that situation. I don't know if that's clear.
I've got another question that's just come through from Yumiao. If I get your name wrong, I do apologize. Sometimes the police ask the interpreter to sign the support person form. What do you think about that?
The police asked to sign the support person form.
Yeah. So I don't really understand that question. So I think the interpreter.
I don't understand.
Yeah,
So
I think
the interpreter asked the support person?
No, I think the police is asking the interpreter to be the support person and getting them to sign for something like that, which I think should not be the case. Interpreters are interpreters, and it would be beyond our role description to do something like that. So you're right, Yumia. You follow that with saying that you think the interpreter is the interpreter and not the support person. Yes. We are not trained to be a support person. We are trained as a language professional, and as a linguistic person there, as a person of offering language services. But I think, providing support in that particular case, and especially even signing for one, is going to be going over the role boundaries of an interpreter.
You're normally asked to sign as an interpreter, but not as a support person. Okay.
Thank you. Yep, we'll come back to those questions. Thank you.
Okay. So a culturally competent professional is aware of the impact of her or his own values on others whose values might be different. A culturally competent professional will challenge behavior that is culturally insensitive, racist, or discriminatory. And in this point, I like to say that we need to be part of the solution. If we see that someone is being treated differently, insensitively, or someone is being racist towards someone else, and we say nothing, and we don't need to challenge, confront that person, but maybe a simple comment will make that person think twice before doing it again. We can't just listen to something like that, witness something like that, and not say anything. If we don't say anything, we're part of the problem too, because it's like we are accepting it. So a culturally competent professional seeks information that will assist in service adaptation to the diverse needs of diverse clients. Is aware of the impact of his own values on others whose values might be different. Challenges behavior that is culturally insensitive. And a culturally competent professional will use certified interpreters. Here, sometimes we need to become a bit of like an educator for service providers to make sure that they understand that they need to use certified interpreters. Someone that is bilingual is good enough for certain situations, but certified interpreters should be preferred in every situation. And works effectively with interpreters. That's the other point. Some professionals or service providers won't know how to work with interpreters. They don't know how interpreters work. They don't even know that there are different types of interpreting. So we could educate people about this.
Just a couple of questions there, if I may stop you.
Before we go into the case studies.
Thank you. So we've got some case studies coming, which is great. Can we have an example of how to deal with racist comments? Is one of our interpreters asking.
Okay.
It's always a good one to handle.
Yes. How to deal with a racist comments? Well, sometimes I use humor. Sometimes, and when someone says something that is racist, I just say, "Well, that was a bit out of place, so that was a bit harsh." A smile, just to ease the comment, but I won't let it go. I will say something. Sometimes it all depends on the situation. It all depends on, because your best friend sometimes could be quite racist. And so if it is a manager, for example, if the manager of your organization is racist, well, I'm sure that there are procedures and processes in place for you to complain about that. Now, if it is a social situation, I would just use humor.
I mean, that's right. I mean, if you're working for an institution or you're interpreting for an agency and then you're working in an institution and you come across a racial comment or a racist situation, I mean, I would take it to the management. If I'm in an in-house interpreter situation, I would take it to my manager. If I'm working through an agency, I would definitely contact the agency so they can contact the institution. I don't think as an interpreter, making a comment there and then and turning it into a little bit of a argument, let's say, might not have the best results, but especially if we're working through an agency or working for an institution, like you said, if it's a professional situation, I think there are procedures in place that we should follow. But like you say, if it's a social thing, there are different ways of dealing with that. But as an interpreter working in a certain setting, I think we should follow procedures, either the agency's procedures or the institution's procedures if we are working directly with the institution, by all means.
Yes, but in either case, I personally would not let it go. I would make a point of, if it is a social situation, let people know that that's not appropriate. If it is in a work setting, go straight, a simple message. You know how when you finish an assignment, you normally have to report on that assignment, whether you finish on time. Make a comment about what happened and how that made you feel.
So I've got some comments coming. If we're interpreting the racial comment accurately as we should, and then is it not up to the client to respond? Yes, definitely. So, for the sake of accuracy, we have to interpret everything that is said the way it is said. And I think the client also has the right to know what is being said. By no means we should be either commenting on that racist comment or commenting or filtering it and not interpreting it to the client. As you know, with the Aussie Code of Ethics, it is a part of accuracy that the principle of accuracy, that everything should be interpreted the way it is said. So by all means, of course, you should be interpreting that, in my opinion. But you know, how do you follow that up? What do you do with this particular situation? Is then you might want to follow it up with that institution's management or your supervisor or through your agency, and give some feedback and comments regarding. But during the interpreting session, by all means, I think we should always be interpreting everything that is said the way it is said.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Okay. Move on to case studies.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, let's go through this one. So a female migrant approaches the reception counter at your service. She shows the receptionist a piece of paper in which is written in English, "I need an interpreter." The receptionist tells the client in English, "We do not have an interpreter here. Bring a friend or someone that can help you." The receptionist then comments to her colleague standing next to her, "People who come to Australia should learn to speak English fluently before trying to use our services." Okay, I'm sure that some of you would have been in this situation. So what assumptions are the receptionist making about the client? And what would you do if you hear this interaction? If you want to write some comments, that would be good, so we can share with other people. I heard this many times: bring a friend or someone that can help you. Bring a friend or a relative that you can use as an interpreter. Even in government organizations where they are supposed to use certified interpreters.
Definitely. I've worked in a major hospital for quite a few years, and you know, unfortunately, some of the people at reception have certain views that they don't have any issues with sharing out loud. You know, even when an interpreter is there, they would actually say to the interpreter, "I don't know why we even employ you. Everyone should be speaking English here." So unfortunately, you know, we do still have some of these staff out there that may be, you know, lingering on from the 70s and 80s and even 90s, like you were saying.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it does still happen, definitely.
Well, that's something that I would definitely report back to management.
Oh, which of course I have done.
Yes.
So just some comments coming. Not ethical for friend to act as interpreter with services. I've got another one saying this type of attitude is still seen today, definitely.
Unfortunately.
Yep. And look, it's a multicultural country, and I think we're always, no country's perfect. We're always going to have issues, but I think it's definitely on a better track than it was, let's say, you know, a few decades ago. But I think yes, it is still seen. What assumptions are the receptionists making about the client? So what would you do if you hear this interaction? Can we have some comments on this? Hanan is saying she's assuming they're ignorant.
Yeah.
Inappropriate. The person should have the right to access a professional interpreter to help them understand completely and impartially what's going on. Yeah, again, it's, you know, they don't, in this case, I guess maybe the receptionist also doesn't know the role of the interpreter and what they're supposed to be doing.
But this person, the receptionist, doesn't know what her role is.
That's correct.
Because she is supposed to hire, engage an interpreter.
That's right. So she looks like she, or sorry, I'm assuming, well, it does say she there, could be she or he. It looks like they also haven't had good training as well before they start their position. I got a comment
here. That's an issue, Patty. That's an issue that sometimes big organizations don't take into account the proper orientation of new staff. And
that's right, yeah, and you know, you've got first-hand experience in this, haven't you? You have been training institutions and organizations within regards to cultural competency, but
yes, and sometimes orientation, because of it's time consuming, or because of funding issues, whatever, they shrink orientation more and more and more. And there are so, especially in big organizations, there are so many areas that need to be covered that has to do with legalities. And they don't even understand that using proper interpreter is also linked to legalities. Because if they don't use an interpreter in a hospital, they could end up in a legal matter. If they don't use an proper interpreter in the police or in the courts, they would end up in a legal matter. So they don't see it as an issue sometimes.
That's correct, and it is a part of the Victorian Human Rights Charter as well. It's also a legal requirement, and more these days, I guess, compared to, let's say, a couple of decades ago.
Oh yes.
It is definitely required for especially certified interpreters to be used. I know that some of you have.
I'm not sure how far.
It's
sorry,
not always the case. Sorry, Marta.
Yeah, I'm not sure how far this has gone, but I know that one organization, a big organization working with refugees here in New South Wales, was working with insurance companies to make sure that the insurance companies would increase the premiums for doctors that don't use interpreters. So make sure that the premiums of this doctor would be increased, affected, if they don't use proper interpreters. I don't know what the legalities were. I don't know how they, whether this went ahead or not, but I know that there were some negotiations in this area. But to make sure that doctors use interpreters.
I know. It's definitely tried to be enforced by hospitals, but there are still professionals out there that prefer not to. But hopefully, that is not the case in the upcoming years. Let me read a few comments out because I promised them. Hopefully, yeah. The organization should ensure that you are trained on how to deal with multicultural clients before placing you at reception, is one comment.
Yeah.
Another one is person requires training in workplace policies. The assumption is that the person is not very intelligent as she does not speak English. Receptionists should be taught or aware of cultural different backgrounds where they are working. The assumption is the client is illiterate. However, some clients can understand but too shy to speak is another one.
Yeah.
And I'll read one more out. Receptionist needs training in cultural competence. And, most of you have made very, very good comments. I'm just unfortunately not going to be able to.
And the other point is the receptionist doesn't know that the client has the right to have an interpreter.
That's correct.
It's not, the organization it's not making this patient or client a favor. The client has the right to an interpreter. Okay, let's go to the next one.
And look, there still needs to be quite a lot of work done on this, and I know that compared to before, it's getting better. But sometimes institutions don't know that they have to hire an interpreter, or they need to. And most of the time, the client, the non-English speaking client, doesn't know that they have the right to an interpreter.
Exactly.
I think if they knew, they'd definitely be asking for it and doing their best to get access to their right to an interpreter. But I think there needs to be some work done on this within communities to, explain to people and inform that they have a right to an interpreter.
Yes, true.
All right.
Okay, so the next one. You have been assigned by a private interpreting agency to interpret at a family conference with the social worker to discuss the results of their child's assessment. The social worker has identified that the child has mild emotional and behavioral problems that might be temporary and can often be addressed successfully as the child develops further and is provided with guidance and support from family and health services. The social worker would like to develop a close partnership with the family to ensure consistency across the home and health settings. The child's parents argue that it is the health worker's responsibility and that they work 12 hours a day and have no time for meetings, and they want the social worker to fix the child's behavioral problems. Because sometimes, and that goes as well with probably the education sector, that some people expect that a social worker, while the child is in the education sector, while they are at school, is the school's responsibility, and don't call me because I'm busy. So as a professional interpreter, what is your role in identifying and resolving cultural misunderstandings?
Yep, so put your comments through and I'll read as many as I can. As
so
a
you have
professional
this
interpreter,
social worker trying to help his child, looking at the parents' involvement, and the parents say, sorry, not time, you fix it.
I've got one.
In resolving cultural misunderstandings.
Is this necessarily a case of cultural misunderstanding is a question. So why do we think this might be a cultural misunderstanding, Marta? I've got another
because
comment.
I've seen it happening. I've seen it happening. Some communities expect that the services, while the child is in the care of the hospital or the education facilities, it's up to them to discipline the child. It's up to them to fix any problems because they're working long hours and they don't have time for
that. Some comments coming. Their child is their priority. It is beyond the role boundaries of the interpreter. You need to explain politely this to the client. I've got another one saying, my role is to interpret, not to identify and resolve my role is to interpret, not to identify and resolve cultural misunderstandings. I don't care, it's not my problem. To give information to the parents about how things work in Australia, cultural misunderstandings, but the role of the interpreter is not to explain this one, is it? It is not the role of the interpreter to do that. However, if interpreter is sure of her convictions, at the end of the job, she can speak to the social worker about what it might be a cultural misunderstanding. I think Madalena has got a very good comment there. It's not the interpreter's role to do that. Yeah, I think, look, we're talking about these things and we're going to come to a conclusion towards the end. We're talking about cultural advice versus, giving cultural information. We're going to get there, but yes, so it's not the interpreter's role to do that. However, if the interpreter is sure of her convictions, at the end of the job, she can speak to the social worker about what might be a cultural misunderstanding. Okay, so that's a good comment there. As a professional interpreter, I have no role in addressing this issue. The parents are the primary carers. Sorry, I'm just reading out random comments here. It's the social worker's role to do that. See, we've got different cultures, different comments here as well. We've got about 400 of you right now, and of course we got very, very different comments coming through, which is great. Interpreter role is limited, so I agree is another one. To explain to parents that social workers' role cannot go beyond what they allowed. All right, so some of the comments that I have read. As a professional interpreter, what is your role in identifying and resolving cultural misunderstandings, Marta?
Well, I guess some people have already said it. while you are interpreting, while you are in your role as an interpreter, you interpret what each person is saying. That's your role. But after the session is finished, if you think that there might be a cultural misunderstanding, that's when you address the professional and you say, look, I think there might be a problem here, there might be a misunderstanding here. And you can explain what you think might be the problem. Someone said it perfectly. It's not our role because we can't provide advice. We are not cultural experts. As I said before, we use our cultural lens to see the world, to view the world. But it's our way of looking at the world. And it's our way of understanding other people's behaviors, what other people are saying or not saying. But that doesn't mean that we're cultural experts. We can provide some information, but we can't be certain that what we are saying is exactly like that. That we can not be certain that the way we see things are exactly what that person is feeling or going through.
That's right. If we have a look at the Aussie Code of Ethics, we have the right to a briefing and a debriefing. And, if something happens during a particular assignment, I think it's always good, I prefer to have a debriefing almost after every assignment so that I can first, evaluate myself and see, what have I done right? What have I done wrong? Can I be better next time? And vice versa. If we have any comments with the professional about what can be done better next time, it's always good to do a debriefing. I don't, intervene during an interpreting session and talk about my views and opinions. By all means, I don't. But if after an assignment, I think there might be an issue with culture and it will have an effect on the outcome, I might have a brief chat with the professional and merely give information about what I think might be the situation, not necessarily giving advice, but just pointing out some of the cultural differences and leaving it up to the social worker or the professional to do further research on it and at least evaluate that, take that on board within their evaluation with this particular case perhaps. I think it's very important that we understand not only do we build a language bridge, we also need to understand both cultures. We also need to build a cultural bridge as well. For example, if, correct me if I'm wrong here, Marta, if in some cultures, when someone speaks to people of higher authority, like the police, for example, they look to the ground because they're either embarrassed or it's out of respect. And in some cultures, looking to the ground means you're lying. So I'm just making things up here. The police or the higher authority person, because a person's looking to the ground, might think they're lying, but they're only doing it out of respect. So it could be something that you might share after the assignment, not during the assignment, not giving advice. But that's just a little example that came to my mind. I think it's always good to have a debriefing and have a little bit of a chat about the assignment, the session, just so that, we can always do everything better. I don't think there's any such thing as the perfect assignment or the perfect interpreting job. So I think a debrief is essential.
Yes, it's good practice.
Definitely. Good practice, best practice, you're right.
Yeah. Okay, so next one. You're interpreting at a private school for parents who would like to enroll their daughter in a selective and very expensive school. The principal explains that 2 out of 3 students who competed for a year 7 place at this high school this year missed out, and that their daughter would have to sit for a test. If she obtains good marks, she will be accepted in the school. The parents say that they are well off and willing to do whatever is necessary to make sure their daughter gets a place in this school. The principal again explains that it will all depend on the test results. The parents then bring up their political connections and their ability to offer additional financial contributions to the school. As a professional interpreter, would you explain that bribing is common practice in their country of birth? And what is your role as a professional interpreter in identifying and resolving cultural misunderstandings? Again,
similar question at the end.
Similar question, but
you know,
a different scenario.
Yeah, in some cultures, bribing is a common practice, isn't it? It's a part of everyday life, and it's actually probably not frowned upon. It's just the way things work. And when you come to a country where it's being frowned upon, and it's just not how the system works, but they don't know this. Do you explain this to the professional? And if you do, when do you explain it? If you, I guess it depends if the professional is getting aggravated, what do you do? These are just questions to get the brains working. All right, so there's no judgment here, guys. So write your comments in. There's definitely no judgment here. So put your comments in, and we're just having a nice conversation.
Yeah, I guess it's common in some countries because if you don't bribe, you don't get. If you don't bribe a police officer, for example, or a politician, or even a school principal, you don't get what you want because of whatever reason, because that's how the country works. It's people are so used to the bribing that when you find someone who is against receiving a bribe, the one that is suggesting to bribe the police officer, for example, they get offended because how come you're not accepting my bribe? So I experienced that. So I know that happens, and it's beyond me, but but I've seen it happening.
We've seen it happen, like even with interpreters as well. You go and work for people, and then people want to take you out for lunch because you did a great job, or they want to get you a bottle of wine. They want to, give you some extra money because, it's a bit of bahşiş, as we say in Turkish, a little tip for doing your job well. And then you have to explain to them, your role and hey, you can't accept these things. And they get offended when you say no, because all they want to do is, take you out for lunch because you did a good job.
I'm not joking. I'm not making this up. It happens.
No. I'm sure we've all run into things like this. I'm just going to read some comments out randomly. And if I miss your comment, it's not for any reason because there are so many. I'm just kind of going, every third one I'll read out.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of the time, interpreters don't have enough time to talk to the professional after each session. They have to go with their next appointment. Look, fair enough. We do sometimes have to go from one job to the other, but hopefully you're lining up your jobs so that they're not very close to each other because one job can go longer than expected. And I know that, of course, it's very hard to get as many jobs as you can. But I guess when you do have time, it's good to do a briefing. And I understand it might not always happen. Again, not the interpreter's role. Same, I would not get involved or explain anything. My role would be to interpret only as I should. During the debriefing, I would explain it. I don't think I'm going to explain this because it's not applied to my personal experience. I don't think the interpreter has any role here in explaining cultural differences. I would explain at the debriefing, but not through the assignment. Unless the word bribe has been used in the conversation, it should be named as such. It should not be named as such, sorry. They have to learn how this country works and forget about what works in their country. I meant, okay, sorry, just randomly reading. I think the principal should explain that in Australia, the rules are different and it doesn't matter what happens back in the child's country. So the interpreter doesn't need to explain anything but interpret. Our role is to interpret. Again, thank you so much for your comments. Just going to read a few more randomly. Marta, be with me. In 35 years of experience, I was only offered gratuity twice. I'll somehow make the parents understand that bribery doesn't work here. At the same time, I will debrief the professional about the way it is in some cultures. Again, as interpreters, it is not our role to elaborate about cultural practices about bribery unless we are specifically asked to. Personal opinion, the organization should be provided this kind of training. And I'll read one more. Not during the interpreting assignment, but during a debrief, you could comment to the principal about this. For this couple, bribing could be a normal practice. All right, sorry if I missed your comments, but I took a random offering there. Marta, you've heard the comments.
Okay, yes, again, I would do my assignment as, interpret while I'm in the interpreting assignment, just continue with the assignment and forget about anything else. But in the end, if this is at a school, but imagine if this is with a police officer, someone can be charged for bribing, and that will remain in their in the books forever, that he tried to bribe a police officer, for example, or she tried to bribe a police officer. So, of course, it would remain at the discretion of the police officer to judge this person or not. But I think in the debriefing session, I would explain what is the common practice in the country of this person. Just in case the police officer, because it's not a question of people trying to commit a crime. It's this person, if the case was with a police officer, that person was trying to help himself, help herself, getting out of a difficult situation. That person, in that person's mind, no one is committing a crime. So it's a way of putting yourself into someone else's shoes. That person doesn't know that bribing is not common practice in Australia. That person has not been educated about that yet. So the police officer might decide not to charge the offender. It might decide
let off in a warning.
to give a warning. So I guess you need to assess each situation.
Each situation needs to be assessed, so those of you that may have studied interpreting translation would, especially within the ethics, we have a look at the demand control schema, and we're going to do a webinar on this as well. We have to look at each case by itself and have a look at the potential outcomes of all of our decisions that we make ethically. So all the potential choices that we make, whether it be for the sake of the client, you, or the professional, we make decisions. Each and every one of us will make different decisions depending on the situation and cultural background and whatever the situation actually is asking you to do, maybe sometimes to save face, like one of you was saying before. I think each case will be taken one by one, and each interpreter will interpret the situation, not just the language, interpret the situation and make their ethical decision accordingly. But again, like we were saying, it might be the best way if you do decide to give information, not advice, give information about a particular culture. I guess a debrief session would be the best place to do it.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So I think this is the last one. Do we still have time?
We've got 7 minutes.
Okay, let's go quickly then. Okay, Miriam is an interpreter who has been assigned to attend the home of an elderly Arabic woman with the palliative care nurse. She's not confident about her knowledge of the lady's culture or experiences, except that there has been a civil war going on in her country. She feels that she needs to find out some more information. So after doing some research on the internet, Miriam begins to ponder whether the information that she has gathered from some of the internet sites is relevant to her new client. She has heard that there is a settlement worker at the local migrant resource center who might be able to help. She decides to give her a call to ask her about her understanding of beliefs around death and dying in the lady's country of birth. So, do you think Miriam has done the right thing? Do you think is it a good practice to find out or research or communicate with people that might provide you more information about your client's culture?
Yeah, so is it okay to find out about a client's culture or a culture about or about a specific culture that you might be interpreting for? And you know, when we say Arabic, I think it's spoken in more than 20 countries, if I'm not wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know the exact number, but it's like Spanish as well. You know, it's right, Marta. It's spoken in many countries.
20 countries.
20 countries. You've got Latin America. You've got Spain. So just because it is the same language doesn't mean it's got to be the same culture. Same with Arabic. You know, is it okay for an interpreter to do research to find out more about a particular culture? All right. So that's the question we're asking. Is it okay to ask around to find out about a particular culture? Some of you have said no. Maybe we've misunderstood the question. You know, for me, it's a part of research. It's a part of preparation for a particular assignment.
It's not just about the people's behaviors, or it's about the language as well, because I'm sure that it happens in the Arabic culture and the Chinese culture. We have many countries that speak Chinese as well.
Mm-hmm.
I know that there are different ways of saying things depending on the country people come from, and they might be talking about, using one term and meaning something different to another Spanish-speaking country. So the same object will have different names, or the same word will have different concepts in different countries. Even though we share the language, sometimes we don't share the words, or we don't share the concepts for the same word.
Mm-hmm.
So learning about other cultures, and I'm learning about the Spanish community all the time. I learn from my clients, and I research. I listen to Netflix, for example. Purposely, I can understand English, but I purposely change it to Spanish just to learn different words from movies or programs that have been dubbed by someone from Mexico or someone from Colombia, for example. So I learn about different language, different terminologies as well.
Yes, definitely. I'll read some more comments out. Elisabetta, hello to you. Yes, it is very suitable to do study about your assignment. It's the interpreter's role to do research all the time. I agree. Definitely as preparation for assignment. I think that's reasonable. First, as an interpreter, your role is to facilitate communication. I think it's good preparation. It might help you to understand the client during the assignment. I think that's exactly what you're referring to, Marta. There was a comment there from Palita.
And I give you another scenario. What if you are a conference interpreter and you need to interpret for 3 hours, for example, for someone that speaks your language, but that person comes from a different country than yours. You probably need to find out what not only the terminology that is going to be used, the technical terminology, for example, that is relevant to that conference, but also how that same language is translated into the Spanish that that person speaks. Normally, with Spanish, we have more neutral language. But if you know that you're interpreting for 1 or 2 people from one country, for example, and that happens sometimes in conferences, you need to find out about that community, that country, the language spoken in that country. So it goes beyond just the behavior or how people relate to each other. It's about the linguistics as well.
They go hand in hand in this case, definitely.
Yeah.
Hushit has made a comment. It's like being briefed before you start the session of interpreting. It would be quite helpful to understand the culture and the way they do things in a particular circumstance. Another one is, not only is it okay, but necessary in order to have a better understanding of the scenario you might come across, is another one. I agree, research is useful in this case. I missed what, there we go. Doing research should be fine as long as you retain the confidentiality of the client, is one I wanted to read out. And let me read a couple more out. It's important though to collect information about a country or culture from multiple sources to avoid biases. Here's another comment.
Yep.
Each person is an individual and should be asked directly, not in an interpreting assignment. Self-education about other cultures is all right, but during the session, she should only interpret what is said and not mix her professional job with emotions and other people's culture and where she is coming from. It's very complicated once you indulge in matters that have nothing to do with your interpreting job. That's correct. It could be very, very easy to, I guess, get emotional. We don't always find ourselves in the most comfortable assignments, do we? They could be quite challenging.
Yep.
All right, look, we're coming to the end. We're already there, so I think we can go on for hours, Marta. And we've got some amazing interpreters here, and I wish that we could spend the entire night commenting about this. So I'll hand it back over to Marta
we can
Yeah.
discuss them later.
Definitely. So send your questions through, send your comments through, and we can definitely have a chat about them later as well. And of course, if you have any particular questions or comments you want to make that you couldn't necessarily make here, you can always email me as well, Fatih, F-A-T-I-H, at allgraduates.com.au. I think Marta has a closing activity for us. Thank you, Marta.
Yes, think about this. The next step I will take in my journey towards cultural competence. Remember, there is a journey, and we become culturally competent every day if we make the effort, if we're committed. So what would be your next step? Think about that. You don't have to tell us, just think about that for yourself. And these are some websites.
Yep, so you can find us on our websites as well as our YouTube channel, LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter for more training opportunities. Now, as I was saying, you can make comments and ask questions after the webinar has ended as well. Once the webinar has ended, you will find a survey that you can submit. So any recommendations, any comments, any questions that you may have, you can actually submit in the survey as well. Okay, and trust me, we read all of them. If there are any questions, we get back to them to the best of our ability. We're going to have a look at all these questions that have come in, not the comments, but the questions, and then we'll answer them with Marta and send them back to you in an FAQ format. So if I wasn't able to ask your questions to Marta or answer them myself, we will get back to you and release the FAQ format as we always do within the next week or two. Okay, so we will compile your questions. It's been amazing. You know, you turned up here in the hundreds. We did only have 90 minutes, so I do apologize if I wasn't able to read your comment out or if we weren't able to answer your question directly, but we will eventually do that in an FAQ format. Thank you again so much to all of you for attending. I hope you have an amazing 2021.